Is the petrodollar over? So, if you've been watching the news recently, you've probably seen a lot of articles coming out saying that the petrodollar has ended, that it's all over. And I did a video about this maybe a year back, about a year ago, and there has been some new developments in the last couple of weeks. And I want to talk about that today and also kind of talk about where we're going with this, in my opinion. And I think it's really interesting because all the headlines say Saudi Arabia has ended the petrodollar. So in 1973, there was an agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia, which basically led to what is known as the petrodollar. And this was actually a security agreement in the sense that the U.S. would provide military protection and military aid to Saudi Arabia as long as they priced all of their oil in US dollars, which created the petrodollar. And that was about 50 years ago. That agreement ended on June 9th, I believe, so last week. And this is why all the articles are coming up, because that agreement has essentially ended. And so people are saying the petrodollar is over. That's not entirely what's happened, but it is kind of what happened. So, will Saudi Arabia stop trading oil in US dollars? Obviously not. That's not what's happened. It's just that this agreement that created these conditions has ended, which now allows Saudi Arabia to trade oil in any currency with any country because they aren't held to this agreement that was providing them with security and military aid. So, this has opened up the door for Russia and China and other countries to negotiate with Saudi Arabia and trade in their own currencies, which is obviously something that countries like Russia and China have been wanting to do for a very long time. What will this actually lead to? Well, in the video that I put out about a year ago, I said that Saudi Arabia and China and the BRICS nations, Saudi Arabia is now part of BRICS, are trying to create a payment platform away from SWIFT. Because what we saw and what we've continued to see is that the United States has abused the SWIFT system and the international banking in order to benefit itself. So they've seized Russian assets, and they are now considering, or I believe they've even started, to hand those assets over to Ukraine in order to help fight the war in Ukraine. And so they're basically stealing from countries and giving it to other countries. It's theft. There's no other way to describe it. They're taking a country's assets and giving them to another country. And they're doing that through the international banking system, through SWIFT. And so countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Russia, countries like Iran, countries like China, and many countries around the world are saying, hey, if they can do that to Russia, one of the largest economies in Europe, one of the most powerful countries in the world in terms of military capabilities and nuclear weapons, they could do it to, anyone. They could do it to any nation. And so China obviously has been been in competition with the United States for many years now, and they don't want their assets to be seized. This is why they've reduced their assets in like treasury notes in terms of their entanglement or their engagement with the United States. This is also something that people have been talking about, decoupling. Well, China says if we hold $1 trillion in treasury notes, which is essentially buying U.S. debt, then they could just wipe that out one day and say, we're not going to pay you back. And then where would China be, right? They could just say, we're not paying it back, we default, and there's nothing you can do about it. And honestly, there would be very little that China could do about it, other than like going to the United States and attempting to seize assets, which would be a war, right? So this whole process of de-dollarization, this whole process of international banking, and this whole kind of globalization is unraveling because people are realizing that if the system isn't fair and if there's no repercussions for bad actors, then essentially you're hostages within this system. And the only way that you can prevent yourself or protect yourself from being misused or abused is by creating your own systems. So Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, and all of the BRICS nations are starting to realize that this is a really important thing, that they need to come up with their own system in order to prevent Western interference. And that's basically how it's seen, as it's Western interference, because other nations that could maybe stand up to the United States, like Great Britain or France or any of the European nations, even Australia, could say, hey, what you're doing is destroying the international systems that we all use and that we all have kind of agreed to uphold. You're destroying that. None of those nations have actually come out and condemned the United States, to my knowledge, have condemned the United States for its actions. Only the opposition, essentially Russia, China, Iran, and Venezuela, and other nations that are saying, hey, what you're doing is wrong, they're the ones condemning the Western system. So all these nations are saying, hey, if we can't work within the framework that has been designed by the United States, because they could seize our assets or they could penalize us without any repercussions, then we need to create our own system. So this is why we're also seeing news that Saudi Arabia has joined the mBridge. So before we continue, I want to say thank you to everyone that subscribed to the new channel, Roots and Restorations. That is where I'm going to be sharing all of my content about Portugal. And if you haven't gone over there to check out what's going on over there, I'd love for you to do that now. So please check out Roots and Restorations. You can click the link below, but let's jump right back into the video. And mBridge is a centralized digital currency, central bank digital currency, that China has been the main, I guess you could say, builder or architect of this blockchain. And so mBridge has moved from the conceptual stage into its minimal viable product, meaning that it actually works and they're going to start testing it. And so this is another piece of the puzzle that has created this news about de-dollarization. So Saudi Arabia said we're going to join this, I guess, loose association and start working to figure out how this mBridge could replace SWIFT and how it could actually create a international settlement network, I guess, or system, much like what SWIFT currently does. So if this works, it'll be based on blockchain technology, and it will allow for countries to buy and sell commodities, including oil, in their local currencies. That's kind of the whole plan. Now, will it work? I mean, it's in its first stages. It could be the beginning of the BRICS dollar or BRICS currency. I talked about this in my video a year ago, that I said most likely this would be based on a blockchain or blockchain technology, some type of ledger, and that's what we're seeing. So China has moved to the next step, and there's quite a few countries that are involved with this. I think 26 nations are involved with this, and Saudi Arabia has joined on. So you could see them pricing oil in their own currency or in other currencies, and using this new cross-border payment system to settle those accounts, to settle those payments. So it's all pretty exciting when you actually think about it, because I've always said in the last videos, and I've always thought, this is my opinion, that you need multiple systems so that you can't abuse one. And essentially, right now, if everything is going through SWIFT, and that SWIFT is controlled by the United States and kind of like the Western powers, then they have the ability to seize assets. They have the ability to freeze assets. They have the ability to essentially control the money flow around the world. And if you only have one, it's a monopoly. We need, most likely, I would say, 3 to 4. That way, when your assets are being frozen in one place, you can say, no, we're going to move those to a different payment system, or you can just have your assets spread out already across multiple platforms and diversified, just so that if something was to happen on one system, say your assets were frozen, yes, you might lose those assets, but it's not going to be the only options that you have. Competition is always the best for consumers. In this case, if each nation is a consumer that needs to do international banking and there's only really one option, then that's a monopoly. So if China, the BRICS nations, can create another option, at least they could run parallel for some time. And this may require the United States to revise its act and kind of reevaluate what it's actually doing in order to come back in line with what countries are comfortable with. But as long as they continue to weaponize the systems, the international banking systems, then people will create alternatives. Countries will create alternatives. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. And this is what I was talking about a year ago, where I said it's going to take time because, again, you have to build the system, you have to test the system, and then you have to implement the system, which can take years. And the fact that this mBridge is now at a place that they're really going to start testing it, that it's an actual product, I think that's really promising. And it also shows the desire to get this up and running very quickly. My original assessment from last year, I said probably 5 to 10 years before we see some real significant progress. I still hold that opinion. I think 5 to 10 years is when we're really going to see competing international banking systems, if nothing really changes in terms of intervention by the United States or some other type of intervention. So it's really promising. Is the petrodollar dead? No, obviously not yet. But this is one step closer to that goal, in which nations have more options, and nations have the ability to choose where they want to bank internationally. And I think that's going to be probably in the next 5 years, we'll see that. And then maybe in the next 10 years, there'll be possibly a kind of crux where one system will succeed and the other one will fail. And I don't know which one will do that. Maybe the United States gets wise to what it's been doing and realizes that it can't continue, and maybe you get better leadership that says, hey, what we've done to weaponize the dollar is absolutely insane and we're going to lose our reserve currency status. Or maybe they continue down that path, and that's really what pushes everybody, all the nations, to another system and says, at least we can try something new, and maybe it's better. That's the risk. So what do you guys think? Leave a comment below. Do you think this is a significant step forward, or is it just kind of fluff and news and, you know, a lot of people saying de-dollarization because it gets views and it's interesting to talk about? Also, thank you to the members. I'm very grateful for the members that we have. If you ever want to become a member, you can check out the member or join button down below, and maybe you would consider supporting this channel in that way. I am very grateful for the members that we have, and I hope to see all of you in the next video.